Climate Action Network. We have entered the era of loss and damage. Therefore, COP26 must, 1, decide to provide sufficient and needs-based loss and damage finance in addition to the $100 billion per year committed for mitigation and adaptation. Loss and damage finance is to be also included in the post-2025 climate finance target. 2, establish a process to identify the scale of funding needed to address loss and damage, as well as suitable mechanisms to deliver the finance to developing countries. The outcome must be presented at COP27. 3, support developing countries in enabling national-level systems to distribute loss and damage finance to ensure country ownership, gender responsiveness, and self-determination. This could be facilitated by the fully operationalized Santiago Network for loss and damage. In addition, COP26 needs to deliver on the 1.5-degree limit. To this end, the cover decision of COP26 must recognize the importance to limit warming to 1.5 degrees, recognize relevant scientific reports assessing the emission gap and the urgency of stronger action to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, commit to raising mitigation ambition for 2030 emission reductions, commit to phase out fossil fuels, and mandate the UNFCCC Secretariat to produce an updated annual NDC synthesis report to be released prior to COP27 and COP28. CAN is extremely disappointed that human rights language was deleted from the final text of the decision of the Glasgow Work Programme on Article 12 of the Paris Agreement. It is just unacceptable that the work programme that promotes public participation, access to information, and climate education does not mention human rights explicitly. We also regret the limited access that observer organizations were given during the consultation process, contrary to the usual practice for ACE negotiations. We have heard strong statements by more than 10 countries denouncing this. We thus look up to them to ensure that the action plan that will be adopted in June acknowledges the centrality of human rights in climate action and includes activities that promote rights-based, people-centered climate action. We call on parties to ensure that human rights are not be treated as a bargaining chip during the remaining negotiations the next week. CAN expresses strong concerns on the issue of inclusivity at this COP. We traveled to this COP in order to participate meaningfully and support negotiations towards ambitious outcomes. However, our participation has been constrained since the first day of the COP by a range of restrictions, many of them unprecedented and not related to the COVID situation. The UK presidency must use the next 5 days to ensure that the voices of civil society and indigenous peoples' representatives are heard in the negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I give the floor to a representative of Demand Climate Justice. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I am Kathy, speaking on behalf of DCJ. Thank you, Chair. And today, 150,000 marched on the street outside these halls, and hundreds of thousands more marched around the world calling for climate justice and system change. These are not rhetorical demands, and they are demands we will win by any means necessary. If there is any hope in the face of climate breakthrough, it is out there and not in these halls. Our movement is growing. We're forging new solidarities, cross-border solidarity, which we'll need as the climate crisis accelerates, because it appears there is no solidarity between parties. How else can we explain the apparent indifference of developed countries to the needs and realities of developing countries who are facing climate disasters which are direct results of hundreds of years of pollution by the global north, but by the colonializers and the settler states. And leaders of these countries make grand statements about how people are facing the climate crisis now, but when it comes to helping them in real terms, there is no system nor any will to establish a system fit for our purpose. And there is not even a will to listen to the needs of developing countries as they face these horrific impacts. Adaptation and loss and damage are not minor technical issues to be considered only in reports of the WIM, including XCOM. They're vital topics pertaining to the reality on the ground, and as pillars of the Paris Agreement, they require proper time, attention, and resources. The global goal on adaptation is crucial because, thanks to the continued greed of global North governments and corporations, countries in the South have no choice but adapt. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, again, let me remind you that you keep your statements brief, and I would now like to invite the representative speaking on behalf of the women and gender non-governmental organizations. You have the floor.
For the ones alive who are not here, and for the ones who have been murdered for protecting our land. Thank you, Chair. My name is Pat Boland, and I speak on behalf of the Women and Gender constituency. All conclusions adopted under SBI must contribute to raising ambition by centering gender equality, human rights, the rights of indigenous peoples, public participation, intergenerational equity, ecosystem integrity, and food security. These principles are not an add-on to ambition. They are a driver of ambition and effective climate policy. This past week has proven that observers' access to consultations is critical to ensure that these principles adopted in the Paris Agreement and numerous decisions are applied transparently and being kept alive. Despite the optimistic expectations that civil society and constituencies had put on the review of the Doha Work Programme on Article 6 of the Convention and a renewed work programme on action for climate empowerment, the result is modest and misses the crucial moment to develop a comprehensive work plan taking into account a gender-responsive, intergenerational and rights-based approach. Parties' failure to stand up for basic language on being guided by human rights in their work sets a deeply bad precedent for transformative action on the ground, or the seriousness of which parties take the human rights violations people face every day in their countries and communities. A key area of progress at COP25 was the adoption of the updated 5-year Gender Action Plan, GAP. Crucially, the updated GAP aimed to meaningfully shift towards capacity building and enhanced implementation of gender-responsive climate action at all levels. We welcome that the draft conclusion recognizes the crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and deepening of pre-existing gender